say, it's irrelevant religion and don't bother with it. It's all about economics and politics.
No.
What I'm saying is that that's all true, and the number of real believers left in Russia or Ukraine or America or Britain is small, or in France here. But I don't think this is about numbers. My approach to mediation is about going to the nub of the issue. I'm like a doctor. This is planetary healing work. So if a patient's brought in and they're bleeding everywhere, and they're in the urgent ward, you go to the root of the cause of the thing, and you block that off. You don't immediately start siphoning off all the blood that's pouring out and deal with that. You stop the root of it. And the hypothesis I'm working with is that the spiritual side is a causative factor in this conflict. I'm not saying it's the only one. I don't know how to quantify and say it's the most important. I don't know, but I do know that my friend, the late Ninian Smart, Professor Ninian Smart, defined religion as that which I'm prepared to die for. That's a definition of what religion, because it's so important to people. I mean, obviously, to many people it's not, but those that are, some of the people that are fighting and killing, it is important to. And what I want, hopefully, with the help of the Spirit, if we can send a clear signal to all those people that are dying at the moment, that their sacrifice is not actually needed, that the Spirit doesn't require this, because it's really heroic being a soldier. I mean, I've nursed soldiers. I mean, to be prepared to give up your life in World War I, all the French people from all the little villages went, and it was a heroic thing. But I think we need to redefine what is heroic. I want to, since you raised it, I'll just share something else I discovered. It's interesting. So I was researching ancient manuscripts in Anglo-Saxon, doing Anglo-Saxon. How many manuscripts are there surviving from those times? Only 400, which is very little for like 500-year period of history, from the birth of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms down to the Norman conquest when they replaced it with Norman French. Only 400 because in the tragic dissolution of the monasteries, the king's mercenary agents destroyed a lot of the manuscripts because they were so anti-Catholic they burned the libraries. Like, this is what I call Sophiaphobia. This is ignorance. But of those 400, they're precious. And I discovered one of them, one of the most important of all, is in St. Petersburg Library. And it was taken there by an amazing Russian savant, intellectual, bibliophile, who was in France at the time of the French Revolution. And he was, like me, a scholar who loved learning and libraries and manuscripts. And he went round, as the mobs of the revolutionaries were like burning the libraries and attacking the aristocrats, he managed to salvage some priceless things from the monasteries of Paris and elsewhere. And he managed to transport them all the way to Petersburg. Like lots of manuscripts, like, many thousands. And one of them is a priceless original copy of Bede, the great Anglo-Saxon scholar, the wisest of the Anglo-Saxon Christians, who he popularized the idea of our current dating system, that we should date things before Christ BC, after Christ Anno Domini, and that way we can get the whole of history covered. That was Bede. He was a great intellectual Anglo-Saxon. He wrote up the ecclesiastical history of the Anglo-Saxons. Anyway, and there's a copy of that in manuscript in St. Petersburg Library because of this guy, this amazing collection of manuscripts. And I was thinking, amazing. So it's interesting that I think the love of learning transcends culture. That man, he was then put in charge of the Imperial Library in St. Petersburg, which is now, it's renamed the National Library of Russia. It's in St. Petersburg. And it's on my map. I have to go. But I'm not going till we stop this war in Ukraine and Russia, because that's just a travesty, and it's got to be done. So anyway, there we are. I just thought I'd mention that. Yes.
As yesterday we spoke about Sequoia.
Oh, okay.
Maybe what do you think about going to shamanic Christianity?
We had that a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, we just had that. We will. I mean, I'm happy to rerun, but no. Why don't we do biology? Because we're talking trees here. How about 159?
Okay.
Biology, which is very relevant to the ecological crisis we're in. So, and I'll do legalism, Chinese philosophy, number 39.
Oh.
Yes. Well, so they're both interesting. I think I've got somewhere the text that goes with this chart, and maybe it would be nice to have it to hand. There we are. Just going to get something. So it's really useful to have the actual book that goes with the table, which gives the details, but they're also online. So let's do Chinese legalism first, because that's kind of interesting and most people don't really know much about it. It's part of the Chinese traditions, so along with Taoism and Confucianism, which are much better known, and there are different forms of them which are in the table here. Then there's Neo-Confucianism, for instance, and there's also Moism, which was another branch of Chinese philosophy. But there's this thing called Chinese legalism, and I have to say I find it an intellectual problem, and I think we're suffering from the consequences of this way of thinking. What the legalists said was that forget about philosophy, forget about ideas. What really matters in life is who's got power and who's got the law on their side. And it became the justification for the imperial takeover of power in China. And the chap that introduced it actually went so far as to have a lot of the philosophers of China killed off. He buried hundreds of Confucian scholars. He was trying to wipe out intellectual freedom in China in the name of legalism, which was might is right. What the law says, you do it. I pass the laws, so therefore, if I say you can't study Confucius anymore, you can't. And if I find you with his books at home, you get killed.
What was the period of this?
This is about 350 BC
Wow.
it started. And this is the birth of the Chinese state. The guy that built the Great Wall of China believed in this. These were seriously powerful warlords who said, we're going to stamp out intellectual activity and philosophy. We're going to just go with law. So can you think of a nightmare society when there'd be no philosophers? People like me would all be in prison or killed. There'd be no questioning of anything, no theology, you can't discuss that. The entire world is run by lawyers. I can't think of a worse nightmare. In fact, I could write a totally dystopian novel based on a world where the lawyers have taken absolute control of everything.
And bureaucracy
and bureaucracy and money and laws and taxes and no thinking allowed. And all the books are burned unless they're law books, right? And that's what they did. And they actually buried these Confucian philosophers with their books. Like this is, and to me that's symbolic of what's been going on the planet in the last few decades. The legalists are back. I don't know how it works, but it's like probably the people that, you know, they reincarnate, don't they? And then they spread their toxic ideas in another lifetime. I don't know where they go in between lives to get re-educated. I'd like to talk to the bodhisattvas in heaven and in the library of heaven, and suggests that these legalists really need re-educating, because it was St Paul who spotted that law alone is no good. You can cheat and lie if you're a lawyer, and it's all about power and punishment and cheating. And Paul, who'd always thought like that, because there was a very strong legalist tendency in certain forms of Judaism, and he'd followed them to the law, and he persecuted these kind of hippie, free-thinking Christians, he suddenly realised he was wrong, that the legalist approach to reality doesn't work. You can't get to heaven through mere law, he realised. It has to be with the encounter of spirit and of ultimate truth. Of course, I'm not saying the total anarchist position get all laws out. We need some kind of law, because there are very bad people in the world and doing very bad things. And if you want to know what they're up to, by the way, another book I've been reading this week is called Very Bad People. The inside story of the fight against the world's network of corrupt people. And it's written by Patrick Alley, who set up and runs a thing called something like a Good Witness. They go around and they've tried to take on the worst criminals, warlords, who are doing dirty deals with our money at very high level, often in the city of London, with fancy lawyers dressed up, looking very posh, but actually they're passing stuff that is killing people in Africa or Asia, and it's all to do with, who's really running the world, the very bad people. So yes, we do need laws, and they're able to get good. There are good people, fortunately, who can fight that lot. But what I don't think we should do is we have to keep morality in the legal system, and that's what these legalists said no. So they were founded by Han Fei Tzu and Lord Shang and Jin Zheng, the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, who ruled from 221 to 210 BC. So I'm just saying I'm on the side of the Confucianists and the Taoists here, and we have to be on our guard, because these people, they lost the argument. The good news is the Confucians came back. China realised you can't get rid of morality. You can't base everything on law. You have to base it on the Tao, on the spirit, which is the Chinese word for spirit, effectively, which is a flowing thing. It's a moving thing, like spirit is. And our duty as human beings, actually, is to be faithful to that flow in our lives, and to be, it's interesting. Something else I was researching this week is the gifts of the Holy Spirit. If you take seriously my proposal that we need to relook at the Holy Spirit to get the splits between Eastern and Western churches healed, and so on, then, which I think is true, then we also need to look at what are the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and they are pretty awesome. Let me remind you, if you forgot. So the first one is wisdom, sapientia. This is the church's teaching, and I believe it's true of all churches, East and West. First is sapientia, wisdom. What's wrong with that? The next is understanding, which is intellectus, which, wisdom, yeah, but you need to understand it, so we need that as well. Counsel, concilium in Latin. There are learned treatises in Latin in the Middle Ages about all these gifts. The other is fortitude, fourth gift, which is strength. We need that, because you might have all the wisdom you want, but if you can't, do anything with it, can't follow through on it, can't act, then that's nothing. It was Spinoza said that peace is a fortitude of the heart, a strength of heart. You also need knowledge, scientia. So you need to understand how the world works and then be able to do stuff to make it better. Like if somebody brings me a broken car, I don't know how to fix it. But there are people that have that knowledge. I know how to fix religious breakdown and interfaith quarrels. You know, we all have our own forms of knowledge. But then we also need pietas, or piety. It's another gift of the Holy Spirit, which is the ancient Etruscan Roman view that we have to be humble before the gods and do what they require of us, which is be honourable and righteous people. And it doesn't matter what religion you follow. You can be a Chinese sage, a Zen master, a Jewish rabbi, a Druid, a Christian. Piety is universal. And it was said by Francis Bacon and Lord Herbert of Cherbury that that's a universal notion in all the faiths. And then lastly, well, in the traditional listing, it's called Timor Domini, the fear of God. I want to change that and update it to the love of God. I think it's time we grow out of the fear of God. Although it's useful, some people, you know, very impious people mock all this stuff and say, you know, it's all nonsense. I can't wait to shoot the guy. You know, there are people with a criminal mentality that the fear of God is probably quite a good thing for them to have, because you know, that brings in things like after death, eschatological judgment and so on, which Kant said underpins all morality, and I agree with him. But I would say that the fear of God turns into the love of God. I liken it to when you have a very special friend coming round, let's say your girlfriend's coming round, you tidy the house up, you make it look beautiful, you put flowers out. You're afraid that she won't like it, and you want it to look beautiful for her. But then when she arrives, the fear goes, and it's replaced by love. To me, the fear of God is like that, or the fear of the goddess, is that moment of waiting for something, and you don't know how it's going to go. But then it converts to love. So I would say it's time to move on from the fear of God.
Comme le trac en français, le trac de l'artiste avant d'aller sur scène.
Okay.
It's like this?
I would say, yeah. Okay, so that's yes. But you see, I don't see these legalists as even being able to understand this list of gifts from the Holy Spirit. Piety isn't among them, and legalists don't understand what piety is. So that's my little comment on that. Now let's look to biology, which is part of the philosophical traditions down at the bottom.
Excuse me, may
Yeah.
I do a comment now, because afterward I will forget.
Okay, go for it, yeah.
I guess the piety is a very important thing, because when you see bureaucracy, it looks like people, they have piety in bureaucracy. They have piety on law. They really think from the heart that following the law is the good way. So that's why I'm surprised.
It's a good point. Yeah, I suppose legalists can be pious in their own way.
Yeah.
Of like, I mean, the Nazis running the death camps were pious. They stamped everyone. They made sure you had the right papers as you went to the gas chambers. It was all done according to the books.
They sleep well because they
did. They filled all the forms
yeah,
in, you know. And IBM was giving them machines. They used punch cards to run the Nazi death camps, which there were dozens of them. And the bureaucrats, you know, it was great for bureaucracy. But you see, there's something wrong with that kind of piety. I'd say it's unethical. You need, to me, true piety, and I think I'm drawing on Etruscan and Roman philosophers here, that true piety is, you know, they thought they were getting away with it, but actually God's watching. You know, the bureaucrat thinks they'll make everything look good in the paperwork, even though they're fiddling. Like the fact they're doing something unspeakable, they're mass killing people, you know, human beings with souls like us. And that's, by the way, what the modern day legalists are doing in the City of London and other centres of financial corruption, is they're doing terrible financial transactions. It all looks good, it's all done perfectly with bureaucratic piety, but actually it's ruining people's lives. And by the way, the book I've been reading reveals that the reason property prices are so vast in Britain, in London, is because a lot of the criminals around the world have funneled dirty money into London and bought property So I can't afford a house on Bishop's Avenue in Hampstead. I'd love to have a little house there. They're at like 10, 20 million now. Because all the criminals of the world are buying them. And they're doing it through front companies, so it can't be traced. But it's come from somebody's blood money, you know. And so that's not pious, that's unethical. But anyway, good point, yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry, could I follow
Sure,
on the
go
comments?
for it, yeah.
Because this piety is the same from legalism or from God. It looks like you need emancipation. I don't know how to say in English.
Yeah.
Emancipation?
Yeah, same word. Yeah.
Same word. And there is a kind of balance to find where to go with emancipation without being, of course, God yourself.
Well, that's one. Philosophically, that's what Fichte said, and that's what the German idealists said: is we are God.
Yeah.
That's how we can get freedom
We
by
are,
realizing that the spirit in us is one with the divine spirit, which is what the Indians had said in the Upanishads and so on. And we're creating the whole show. I mean, we're only little godlets, as my friend Sir George Trevelyan used to say. We're not the God, we're just little godlets, little baby ones. But we are part of it, and we are creating the whole show, manifesting it. And I think we therefore have a moral responsibility to make the thing manifest properly, according to right conscience and good order and love. We have a duty. And that's my problem with the committee that sentenced Christ, for instance, to death. The bureaucracy of that committee, it was a bureaucracy. They thought they were pious. They had a rebel rouser, a heretic.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. The community of priests?
Of priests,
Of
yeah.
priests?
The Sanhedrin, who sentenced
okay.
Christ to death.
Okay.
I'm just using that as an example. We could talk about the bureaucracy that sentenced Socrates to death, or countless other cases, Sufis. Wherever spirit speaks up, they normally get sentenced to death by the bureaucracy of the day. And it's a sociological problem. We have the enlightened one confronting the bureaucracy. And this goes on even within the church. We have Teilhard de Chardin confronting the bureaucracy of the Vatican and being silenced. Or we have Matthew Fox, who was a theologian who emphasized original blessing instead of original sin. The whole edifice of the church is based on original sin. He said, no, that's wrong. We need to emphasize original blessing. And the church response through the Inquisition was to silence him. Can't speak, he said. So that's the problem. The bureaucracy, the Inquisition, will always try and silence people of spirit. But I'm with Plato. You have to go on teaching philosophy up to the last minute. And Rabbi Friedlander, a great Jewish friend of mine, he was a rabbi in London, his mentor, Leo Beck, he wrote his biography, had survived the concentration camp. He was interned. He was a chief rabbi in Berlin, and he was put in the camps. He survived it by teaching philosophy classes to anyone that would come from the inmates. They would discuss Plato, they would discuss the Torah, they would discuss Maimonides. And by keeping alive mentally, they were able to fight the system of evil that was dehumanizing them with the bureaucracy of suffering. That's why philosophy is such a fantastic, powerful weapon to fight back against evil. Yes. Can I share another story?
Yeah, please.
About Russia? I've discovered something this week. It's amazing. It must be because I've offered to do the mediation of Ukraine and Russia. So, because I did 3 years of Russian history and studies, and I went to Moscow, and I have Russian friends, and I'm deeply sad about what they've been doing with this crazy guy. Anyway, I'm very interested in the history of Freemasonry in Russia. It was very important in the intellectual life of the Enlightenment in France here, and there were links to Russia. And I was asking myself, was Freemasonry legal? For instance, that chap who took all those manuscripts from Paris and the Revolution to Petersburg, Was he allowed? Was he a Freemason? Was he allowed to be? He was typical of the Freemason pansophists, we call them, lovers of wisdom. And I discovered that the Tsar at that time was Alexander I. And he had a love-hate thing with Freemasonry. He kind of, initially, he said no, he abolished it. No Russians can be Freemasons. There were already lodges in Petersburg and Moscow since the 1750s, founded by a Scotsman called Sir James Keith. The Scottish were big on Freemasonry, so it had percolated, and the intellectuals really liked it. But intellectuals are dangerous, so the Tsar said no Freemasons. But then 3 years later, he abolished it in 1801, I think. In 1803, he said no, it's fine, and he became one himself. Because he realised they actually are quite interesting, and they're intellectuals, and they're not harmful, they're just thinking types. And he wanted to know what was going on with them. So he became a Freemason. I think he was quite a good Tsar. He's the guy that beat Napoleon. And if you see the movie Napoleon, he's the Tsar that eventually defeats Napoleon. And he's very upset when Napoleon comes to Moscow and burns it. Which I think was an accident. I don't think Napoleon meant to burn it. It was a mistake, possibly set by some disgruntled Russians. It's a mystery. But Napoleon was very arrogant. He should not have invaded Russia, in my opinion. It was a silly move. But anyway, the Tsar, Alexander I, lived on to 1825, and he became more conservative later on. I think. And a lot of the younger people of Russia got annoyed with him because he was really reactionary by the end. He was against liberalism and Anyway, in 1825, he died mysteriously in a port far from the capital, and he was only 47. And there's a legend that he didn't actually die. He secretly abdicated the throne because he was fed up with the bureaucracy. He didn't want to be Tsar anymore. He'd played it long enough. It was too much pressure because he was getting attacked by the Conservatives for not being conservative enough, getting attacked by the Liberals for not being liberal enough. Everyone was against him. He said, to hell with this. And he went off to Siberia and became a hermit called Fyodor Kuzmich, who lived from 1776 to 1864. And there is some evidence that that may actually be true, that the Tsar literally gave up the throne, became a Christian hermit in the depths of Siberia, and lived a happy life till 1864, just doing a Tolstoy, living with the goats in his little hut, and was a very holy man. What's the evidence? Well, he looked like the Tsar. He was the same size. His writing has been analysed by different experts. They say it's the same handwriting. He was visited by several of the royal family who came to check him out. When he was buried, the Tsarevich, who became Tsar Nicholas II, went to the grave. So I think the royal family thought it was actually Alexander I, and he's been made a saint in the 1980s in our time by the church. So I think now, if it's true, and I just suspend judgment, I think it's really interesting about the Russian soul. This is what I'm going to be appealing to in Rome at the mediation. The bureaucrat, the arch-bureaucrat, the Tsar's the head of the system, actually wants to be a Taoist sage living in the woods, right? And I'm going to suggest this as an option for Putin. I've always thought that Putin should just step down and go and be a hermit somewhere, because deep down that's what he wants to be. He can't be that nasty. He's created this bureaucracy of absolute death, merciless killing, slaughter. He's killing tens of thousands of his own Russians. It can't sit on his conscience very well. And I'm going to suggest that maybe he should do an Alexander I and just, And it's interesting that the port where Alexander I died is actually at the Sea of Azov, on the very border between Russia and Ukraine. So it's quite symbolic, this. I think it's time for Russia to sort of take a turn in the spiritual direction, and realise that the spirit is what can save the day here. Anyway, that's just a little, I thought I'd share that story. It's interesting, isn't it? Let's go back to biology. So, founders of biology, well, I've included the Chinese Yellow Emperor. He's the sage of classical medicine, because this table number 159 also includes medicine. There's been a strong relationship between medicine and biology throughout history. I've included Imhotep, who was a great sage in Egypt, and of course Asclepius, the founder of Greek medicine, and Hippocrates. And all these, healing is essential to all these great traditions. But with Aristotle, you come to biology as such, because Aristotle was from a medical family. His father was the physician to the king of Macedonia, and his father before him and before him. He was steeped in medicine. But his father, I don't know why, it's really interesting to reconstruct. Why did his dad not want him to become a medical doctor? Instead, he sent him to the academy in Athens to study with Plato the philosopher. He must have heard of it and realised it was exciting and interesting, and he wanted his bright young son to go and experience it. So I think the way I think of Aristotle's thought is he applies medical approaches to knowledge, to philosophy. Plato had been a genius, a poet, a mystic, a painter of stories, a myth teller, incredible, but also was starting to do in-depth inquiry and logical thinking, inspired by Socrates. But Aristotle comes along and does an inventory of all possible ways of having arguments and who's discussing what. One thing I've been doing this week is I'm listening to Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica as a talking book. And Thomas Aquinas takes Aristotle and the Bible and he makes a sort of a mélange of them. And it's amazing to watch and to see how he does it. I think Aristotle, among the many other things he did, was he sort of began the theory of biology. What is living matter? What's the difference between living matter and inert matter? What's the difference between the cup and my hand? He said that living matter has an entelechy built into it, which is a will to do something. It has a motivation to an achievement, a telos, an end. It's striving to an end: food, comfort, pleasure, peace, whatever. We animals, we are self-movers. Whereas the cup just sits there being a cup. It doesn't, unless poltergeists appear, it doesn't start moving around. And that was one of the insights that Aristotle had. So he then asked, well, what is it in living matter that does that? Why do these living creatures have this entelechy that makes them want to move towards some goal or end? And that's the beginning of biological science, if you want. And then he got very interested in comparing and studying different animals. He had a whole collection of animals that he gathered, and what's the difference between this type of animal and that? And he started classifying and cataloguing and coming up with the idea of species, that you can group different types of animals according to, and there he was trying to invent ways of doing it. Is it how many legs they've got, or how many heads they've got, or is it whether they're born from a womb or an egg or what? He experimented with different ways of classifying. And his thinking really has